There's some big green news today from Games Workshop. Every boy gets an invulnerable save in the Green Tide, and the Dreadmobs can push the big red shiny button to get all manner of fun damage effects. Let's talk detachment previews and Orky news with an overview of teasers from a new Ork Codex. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Orks, and in this video I thought we'd go over Games Workshop's first proper teaser as to the greenskins, following on from last night's announcement of the Battle Force combat patrols and a few other rules bits and bobs that Games Workshop has coming for the Orks this weekend. As per the last few videos on the channel, it looks like it's a big release week for Warhammer 40k. There's Battle Forces combat patrols and new detachments coming for the Orks and the Custodies. It seems that the first teaser preview that Games Workshop have given us are for the Orks, this one focusing mainly on 2 of the different detachments. We know we're getting 6 from the Codex, including this list here. I've got no doubt that we'll see a few more interesting bits over the course of the week, and there's a Custodies vs Orks battle report on Warhammer Plus on Wednesday that might give us a few more interesting hints. We know that the detachment list for the Orks has the War Horde, which is now confirmed to be the generalist melee detachment similar to the Index. Might be a few subtle rules changes there. The Big Hunt is for Beast Snaggers, the Cult of Speed is for Speed Freaks, including buggies, bikes and trucks apparently. The Dreadmob is for walkers and also grot vehicles and mech things. The Green Tide has Horde Orks, mainly focusing on the boys datasheet, and the Bully Boys is for knobs and mega knobs getting extra wars. Obviously we won't know exactly which ones are looking strongest or most interesting until we have the full details of the Codex, and even then we'll need points cost to actually see which units are looking good for the Orks. But I still think it's really interesting to get some of the details early. This one mainly focused on the previews for the Dreadmob and the Green Tide, and has the core rules plus a few supporting rules for them, plus a few really nice hints for the other stuff, the Bully Boys and the Cult of Speed in particular. As I mentioned in one of the previous videos as well, we also have a few teasers from other things. It's had confirmation of a bunch of removed units and Ghaz Thracker's new profile, which I will still cover for completeness at the end of the video. Starting off though, let's delve into the Green Tide. I think it's really great to try and have Games Workshop support them as an actual army again. I do remember they had a kind of slightly mad Green Tide around 7th edition where it was literally 100 boys all in one unwieldy crazy unit. This one might be a little bit more sensible than that, and I hope it makes Horde Orks a viable way to play, as it's definitely one of their iconic archetypes among many. I've definitely got selfish reasons to be invested in this one, given that I own an Ork Horde list from back in 5th edition originally. I've not really added too much big stuff to it since. It would be quite nice to put a big Orky Horde on the table, and it not be a worse way to play them than having to load them into trucks and things. It seems that the core rule for the Green Tide is a durability one called Mob Mentality, a bit different to the Tyranids Horde style list of the Unending Swarm, which is more about board control and things. Looks like the main part of the rule is that you get a 5+ invulnerable save on your boys every single turn, not just the turn of the war. The keyword stated here is just boys, not Beast Snagger boys or anything like that. Though I feel like we don't have 100% confirmation as to whether they'd be affected. They often do mess around with keywords a little bit when they redo the codexes. It's not impossible that the Beast Snaggers might get the boys keyword, or it might just literally mean it is just units of actual standard boys, and leave those Beast Snaggers to their own big hunt detachment. I feel like it might have been nice enough to include the Beast Snaggers, though I guess we'll wait and see. Actually being limited to like 120 boys might be genuinely a little bit irritating for 2,000 points if literally all of the rules key around that datasheet. There's definitely been times in 40k's past where you could have 180 or even 210 orcs on the board if you really maxed it out, and not even be that bad an idea. As it goes, I think the 5+ invulnerable save is a strong durability boost. It's really going to make any sort of quality enemy weapons feel really bad. Anything with high AP is just going to be really wasted against the Orks, and often I feel like durability is one of the most important things out of a Horde army. Each individual mob needs to be really quite hard to take down, otherwise you might have your opponent just destroying the most important one and winning the game for a bit of defeat and detail. The 5+ invulnerable save is definitely really quite nice, though I feel like maybe compared with the Kroot getting that against Shooty, it's maybe not quite as universally awesome as it is for them. One turn you would have got the 5+ invulnerable save anyway, as it sort of directly overlaps with the War there. It doesn't say you get extra durability in the turn of the War or anything like that, so it's basically only 4 extra turns of 5+ invulnerable save. And I would bear in mind that it won't actually make a difference against anything that's AP 0 or AP 1 against things that have cover. Quite a lot of the best weapons for destroying hordes of infantry do tend to be those kind of profiles, and the invulnerable saves aren't going to help with that. Still though, it is a very nice rule to have. In combination with that, when big mobs of models are intact, you get to reroll saving throws of 1 if the unit contains 10 or more models when it's targeted. A small extra durability boost. If you are saving on those 5+ invulnerable saves, it adds around about 8% to the squad's survivability, so not really loads in my opinion. You do have a pretty high chance of just rerolling those 1s just into more fails if you were saving on 5s. It's also not for the entire time that you have mobs about. If your opponent depletes a bunch of mobs below 10 with their first set of shooting and then finishes off with something else, you won't get this benefit. But it does sound that for any 1 unit that's firing against 1 target, you will either get all of the reroll ones or none of them, given that it seems to trigger when an attack is targeted as opposed to rolling and failing saves. In any case, it seems nice to have. It does seem that the intention for this detachment is that you bring lots of boys with 20 models in the unit, and it looks like basically all the other options that we've seen previewed so far support this. Overall, seems like a nice enough detachment rule. It will mean that your orcs aren't quite as dangerous in this one compared with the War Horde detachment with the sustained hits, so your orcs are more durable here if they're boys, but not quite as fighty. Otherwise, we got a few stratagem previews. The first one's Bulldozer Brutality, which is a 1 command point 1 to help a boys mob get more units fighting in melee. Again, triggers off the boys keyword only, and this one means that models that are within 3 inches of an enemy unit that's engagement range with your squad will be able to fight. That really is quite handy, could be very useful for making the boys hit the enemies through awkward bits of terrain and things. I feel like there probably will be enough times when this is genuinely useful enough to use, though I'd bear in mind that if you're fighting in 2 neat ranks where you've managed to get the boys into combat fairly maximally anyway, it's probably going to have sort of limited application. If you're maximally using the space with those 28mm bases, you might well be blocking off a fair few of the boys further back. I guess it might make the difference between fighting in 3 ranks rather than fighting in 2. Overall, feels like it's situationally useful if you do need to pile every single chopper into close combat. I feel like it could have been one of the rules that would have been quite nice just as a core part of the detachment though, maybe more so than triggering it for 1 CP when needed. Otherwise though, another fun one is Come On Lads. 1 command point to get a few more boys into the fight, regenerating D3+2 boys into a depleted unit. This one triggers in the command phase, and that means that you on average get 4 models back, though it will swing a bit. In theory, that's around about 34 points worth of slain models returned to the board. Quite nice to throw this at the focally most critical mob in a slow army that might struggle to bring its numbers to bear. I feel like this one's going to be most powerful whenever it can produce an interesting swing, as well as just more extra damage and defense on the board. It could be useful for battle shock things, as it happens in the command phase. This one will happen before battle shock, so potentially you could regenerate enough models so your unit doesn't need to test anymore. On top of that, you could pull off objective shenanigans with this. You could put another 3 or 4 more boys on a critical objective and swing it from your opponent's control to yours. That could be an extra trading CP for victory points there. And it could be another tool to help propel the boys into melee. If you put them at the front of the units, then you're going to shorten the distance that you need to charge later in the turn. If this new front rank moves maximally far towards the unit that you wanted to charge later on, you might have taken, say, an extra 2 or 3 inches off the charge roll. Overall, this just seems great. I feel like it'll get used quite a lot of command phases. And again, it's another thing that really incentivizes big mobs of boys, things that might get damaged but not outright destroyed. Finally, for the Green Tide, we have Ferocious Show Off. This one's an enhancement for a leader for a unit. An Orcs infantry model gets +1 strength, or goes up to +3 strength if they're in a unit of 10 models or more. If you took this on maybe an obvious choice in the War Boss, they're already strength 10 or strength 11 in the War. This enhancement would have him going up to anywhere between strength 11 or strength 14, depending on the exact circumstances. In general, could help a little bit for a bit more fight against toughness at 10 to toughness 12 type models. Maybe not the worst to have for tangling with the enemy's heavies. I feel like this one is maybe a little bit on the underwhelming side though. I feel like it's going to be just a points filler and one to have if it's super cheap. I can't really see this changing your strategy in a major way, and it's only going to be a sort of medium buff against certain targets for 1 model in your army, even if that model is a fighty one. Overall though, broadly looks fun for the Green Tide so far. Will be interesting to see what other stratagem options they have. I'm not sure if they'll get a full-on recycler unit type stratagem like the Tyranids got. I feel like that might be a little bit unlikely if there's already the option to replenish models. I wouldn't be too surprised if there's some reactive durability boost to go alongside the detachment rule though. Maybe one of those stratagems that helps against blasts could be useful. Otherwise, for the previews today, we have the Dreadmob. This is the Orky Walker detachment, and actually, despite its name, it looks like it's got a slightly bigger scope than that. It looks like it will affect anything that's got a mech keyword, an Ork Walker keyword, or a Grotz vehicle keyword. In the article, they did double down and say that that definitely means that things like mech-led infantry will get this rule, even though the don't press stat sort of implies pressing a button in a vehicle. And at the moment, Ork Walkers means Killercans, Death Dreads, Gorkanauts, Morkanauts, and Big Stompers. The Grot vehicles will apply to mech guns, Killercans, and I guess Grot tanks from Forge World, which is kind of fun. The core rule for the detachment is called Try Dat Button, which feels like a bit of a return to form of the Don't Press Dat special rule from the old looted wagons. And in true Orky fashion, this is a random effect unless you want to risk hazardous rolls. On a 1 to 2, you get sustained hits whenever you shoot or fight. 3 or 4, you get lethal hits, or on a 5 or 6, you get extra AP on a critical wound by 2, so that's a wound roll of a 6 unless you have anti on the go. My first thought for meaningful damage boost is that sustained or lethal hits on a 6 is really quite a significant boost to Orky shooting specifically. If you're only hitting on a 5+, then a very good proportion of your actual hits will be the critical hits. So say for example, if you had a standard Orky vehicle that was hitting on a 5+, this would be an extra plus 50% to your firepower if you chose sustained hits, and that's quite a big deal. Lethal hits is going to be kind of similarly good if you're fighting against something that you wound on a 5+. The extra AP on critical wounds is a bit target dependent. I feel like most of the time there's a good chance that's going to be the worst, apart from against really specific targets that have 2+ saves or cover and things. Otherwise, on top of this, if you do desperately need just one of these effects, then you have the option to make all your weapons hazardous and choose your favourite one of those 3 buffs, potentially taking a bunch of damage on your vehicle or killing a few of your Orc models within the squad to make something extra nasty. Again, feels very orky, but also actually gives you a bit of control of the rule as well. You can choose whether it makes more sense just to roll random or to take some damage and get something that you absolutely need. Both options having a bit of a way to backfire, but that feels all very appropriate for the greenskins. I feel like it really depends on the unit that you're using as to whether that's worth it or not and exactly what they're targeting. Hazardous rolls killing basically 1/6 of your Orc infantry unit is going to be pretty brutal unless you are getting something very significant in damage in return. And the same for Orky vehicles, it's going to be far more meaningful if you're hitting with one really big range or melee profile, far less good if you're pinging away with a whole bunch of big shooters, potentially triggering you some big hazardous rolls. Interestingly enough, they do make hazardous kind of double stack. If you're firing with a custom Mega Blaster or similar, that one then becomes hazardous on a 1 or 2 rather than just a 1. So if you want the big damage explosions there, then you've got a very high chance of damaging yourself. Might be at least a reasonable chance that it's worth just rolling random and accepting the fact that you might roll that AP one from time to time. In any case, seems like a pretty fun rule. Might mean there's just a little bit of dice rolling and admin if you've got this going off on every single unit in your army whenever they attack though. Quite a lot of dice rolls and having to keep track of what sort of buffs you get. We didn't get quite as many rules previews for the Dreadmob detachment. Will be fun to see what else they get, though I feel like this stratagem does look like a pretty interesting one. 1 command point for bigger shells for bigger gits. I guess that's going all very orky and expending the snazziest rockets to take down the biggest things in the enemy army. This one affects the same sort of things that you have as your detachment rule. 1 mech, Ork Walker, or Grotz vehicle unit. It's only used in the shooting phase, so you can't use this in combat or anything like that, and that unit gets a +1 to wound the monster or vehicle target that you've chosen. And again, you also have the option to acquire a hazardous keyword, getting a +1 to the damage characteristic of the attack until the end of the phase, at the expense of taking hazardous rolls on your unit. To me, from the way that this one reads, it sounds like the damage boost isn't actually tied to monsters or vehicles or anything like that, so it still could well be worth using if you happen to be fighting some elite infantry potentially. You could potentially have mech-led looters or burners getting damage 2 or damage 3 weapons, which could be kind of scary. I kind of like the idea of the Gorkanaut's big 30-shot mega shooter getting sustained hits 1 from the detachment rule, and then landing an average of 20 hits that all be at AP 1 and damage 2. That feels like it could put pays to a rather big unit of enemy Space Marines if you are willing to take some hazardous rolls. Overall, again, looks fun. I feel like I do quite like these rules. Maybe feels just a tiny bit similar to the Chaos Space Marine Dark Packs, getting you some serious damage boosts, though at a risk, and with a bit of orky randomness, but maybe not so much that it's just kind of annoying and meaningless, as opposed to interesting. Really excited to see what the other stratagems and the enhancements are for this one. Finally, we also got a couple of free text teasers. The Cult of Speed apparently will have trucks and buggies gaining a 4+ invulnerable save for going extra fast, which to me sounds like it might be advance and get the 4+ invulnerable save. Will be interesting to see what sort of supporting rules that gets though. If all the guns in the detachment also get the assault keyword, then you can just be rocketing around, firing off Dakar all over the place, hopefully while being very durable indeed at the price of not charging. Or it could be the case that maybe they just get a 5+ invulnerable save if they've moved full stop, and it goes up to a 4+ if they've advanced. A fair few possibilities there, but hopefully they manage to do something enough to make the buggies and bikes worth it. They have been pretty underwhelming in 10th edition so far. Otherwise, for Bully Boys, they simply said that that's going to be knobs focused, and you're going to gain extra wars for those units specifically somehow. Again, I'd guess they're probably talking about the core detachment rule there as opposed to specific stratagems or anything. It really depends on how that's delivered. Knobs are a very threatening melee unit right now anyway, and there's a massive difference between Orc melee being in the war or not in the war. If that one's actually kind of usable, then it could be really big. Hopefully it bucks the trend a bit of some of these elite style detachments just being a bit on the underwhelming side. Things like First Company weren't great for Space Marines, nor the Obeisance Phalanx for Necrons. Seems that so far the only thing that we don't have any detachment hints for is the big hunt. Maybe we'll get some more teasers for that later in the week. I did notice that there's an Orcs vs Custodes battle report, so maybe we'll get a few more rules previews from that. Otherwise, just for completeness sake, for the Orc rules previews, we also have the new Ghaz datasheet. I did mention this in a previous video, but the Prophet of the War himself has managed to gain a couple of upgrades into the Codex. Perhaps the biggest thing is that he gains a sweep profile on Gork's Claw. That means that he can swap out those strength 14 attacks for a big 12 attacks at strength 8, AP 2 and damage 2. That's going to be a massive upgrade against any sort of infantry unit, particularly standard Space Marines. On top of that, his Prophet of the War rule was enhanced. He still gives the +1 to hit and wound for his unit in melee, which is pretty mighty in itself. Means he still wounds on a 2+ with anything toughness 7 or below, even with the sweep profile. But on top of that, he's got amped up in the war. Critical hits go off on a 5+ for the unit rather than a 6, which means that the entire unit will get lethal hits as well on a 5+, even sustained and lethal hits if you happen to be in the War Horde detachment, unless they've changed the special rule somehow. Overall, seems like Ghaz got a big boost. No idea if this might actually come with a points increase or not. I feel like at the moment he is usable for Orcs, though not enormously standout. I feel like he could afford to get better and it wouldn't be problematic. Finally, we do also know the Orc Codex datasheets that have sadly been lost. There's 51 datasheets in total, which is down from 57 in the current index. 7 have been lost, and we've gained 1 in a generic Big Mech, which didn't really technically have a datasheet before. The main outright losses are Boss Zagstruck, Mad Dog Grotznik, and Captain Badruk, all of which were Finecast Resin Orc characters, I believe. Kind of sad to see these go, all of them really quite iconic characters, and helps to exemplify the traits of some of the clans. I don't think it's impossible that they might get some sort of re-release in the future though. Any of them feel like they could just be ideal one-character releases for a new Orky range if Games Workshop decided to go down that way, though I suspect that given their removal from the book, it won't be till at least 11th edition, and perhaps not even then. Otherwise, looks like the Mechboy Workshop is no longer going to be a datasheet, but just going to be terrain now, though there's still rules for the Big Ed Boss Bunker. The Big Mech with the custom force field has been replaced by the new Big Mech datasheet, which I don't think will have the custom force field on it, so if you want one of those, I guess it's the Mega Armor Mech. The knob with the wire banner's gone away. I guess I'd just include him in a regular knob mob and have him stand in for a regular guy. And it seems that the knob on Smasher Squig has been rolled into the Squighole Boys datasheet. I'm not really too surprised at that one really. He is packaged alongside them, and I did feel it was kind of weird that he was separated out as a character in the first place. In any case, sad to see some of these go. Maybe in particular for gameplay terms right now, Captain Badruk will be sorely missed by his flash kits, who he could make dead shooty. In any case though, that aside, it's broadly positive news for the Orcs. With the preview so far, I think there's enough interesting that would make the Green Tide and the Dreadmob potentially interesting detachments, depending on eventual points costs and what other rules they have to support. It will be really fun to dig into the rest of the rules once we get them. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or any other implications that these rules might have. I'll certainly look forward to covering the rest of the Orc rules as we get previews over the week and do a full review of the Codex when we get the 4 rules in total. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see any of that. Otherwise, if you were looking to pick up the Orc Codex or any of the peripheral releases alongside it this weekend, there's plenty of places to get them a bit cheaper than Games Workshop. Several discount retailers linked down in the video description, anything bought through them helping to support Auspex tactics. Pre-orders should be going live at 10 AM in the UK or midnight for Wargame Portal in the USA between Friday and Saturday Central Time. If you're looking to land battle forces like the Stomper Boys, might be worth being early. We don't know how much Games Workshop might have produced for them. A big thank you to people using those links just for model purchases in general. It is a big help to the channel. In any case though, an absolutely massive thank you for listening. The other option for supporting Auspex Tactics is via the Patreon page, also linked in the video description. That's the one that gets you automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways each month, plus a few other bits like seeing certain videos early and Discord roles and names in the credits and things. If any of that sounds interesting or you'd just like to help support, the link's in the video description. In any case, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.